Before there was Paul Di'Anno, before there was even a demo tape, there was Paul Mario Day. The first frontman of Iron Maiden, who helped lay the foundation for what would become one of the greatest metal bands in history, but whose name most fans still don't know. And with the tragic news of Paul's passing, I thought we'd go back, all the way back, to tell the story of Iron Maiden before anyone was even watching. This is the story of Paul Mario Day. Paul Mario Day was born on April 19, 1956 in the East End of London. He first started singing at the age of 10 or 11 in school. Yet, if we're being very honest, none of his gigs before he joined Iron Maiden at the age of 19 were professional. And interestingly enough, according to Paul himself, he wasn't really a professional singer all the way until the band More started, way after his time at Iron Maiden. Which I kinda think may explain why his tenure at Steve Harris's band wasn't that long. Yet nevertheless, he was always influenced by Robert Plant, Ian Gillan, Ozzy Osbourne and Rob Halford, who according to him simply changed the game with the release of said Wings of Destiny. Yet, although it's always interesting to learn about the early days which shaped a musician, if you're being very honest, well, there isn't really that much to talk about Paul's musical endeavors before his meeting with Steve Harris. Although that story itself is actually as East London as it gets. According to Paul himself, it all started in the most unexpected way. Not through a gig, an ad, or even an audition, but on the street. Back then, Paul was working as a motorcycle mechanic in East London. One day, standing outside the workshop, he spotted a familiar face walking by with a group of guys. Steve Harris. Interestingly enough, he actually had seen Steve for the very first time just before that, playing bass in his then previous band, Gypsy's Kiss. And the only thing Paul could remember Steve by that night was that he couldn't stop thinking about how bloody good that bassist was. So Paul, with no real band experience at that time, decided to simply take a shot. He walked right up to Steve and simply said, "I think that I'm a singer. Could I join your band?" After which Steve Harris looked at him and simply said, "No."
What do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean?
And that was it. Paul shrugged, went back to work, and figured that was that. But a week or two later, Harris did come back. And it turns out Steve couldn't say anything that day because the current singer of his band was right next to him. But now that he was free, he was interested. "Do you want to come and have a blow?" Steve asked. Paul did, and straight away he was singing Steve's early songs. And just like that, Iron Maiden's first ever lineup finally had a voice.
Let's go!
The new kids on the block on what would later become the new wave of British heavy metal, with their rather provocative name Iron Maiden, played their first official gig on May 1st, 1976 at St. Nicholas Hall in Poplar, London. And among the songs the band performed that night were a couple of originals, including Iron Maiden, Transylvania, Wrathchild, Purgatory and Strange World, and several covers, among which there most likely was I've Got the Fire. And overall, Paul mostly remembered playing Iron Maiden, Wrathchild, Innocent Exile, Another Life, and I've Got the Fire together with Iron Maiden. So the songs, most of which actually did not make it on their debut album, but rather appeared on Killers, which I think is actually pretty interesting, and there is actually a very specific reason for that. But that is a topic for a different video. But nevertheless, sadly enough, despite Iron Maiden playing a bunch of shows together with Paul before finding a new vocalist, Dennis Wilcock, neither any of those, nor any of the rehearsals the band had at that time were actually recorded. Although in the Iron Maiden bootleg community, there is a tale of one bootleg, which consists of almost an entire song performed by Steve Harris on bass, Paul Mario Day on vocals, Terry Rance and Dave Sullivan on guitars, and Ron Matthews on drums. And apparently this is a little bit from it. Yeah, what a beautiful piece of music.
Beautiful!
But yeah, sadly enough, in 1976, Paul Mario Day actually left Iron Maiden. And according to Steve Harris, this happened because Paul simply lacked charisma when performing on stage, and was replaced by nobody else but Dennis Wilcock, who definitely did have charisma while performing on stage. And at this officially, despite being the first voice of Iron Maiden, Paul Day did not actually contribute to any songs which eventually made it to either Iron Maiden or Killers. But at the same time, it's still worth pointing out that several years before his passing, Paul Day actually publicly went out with a statement and claimed that he contributed both lyrics and music to Strange World, a song which eventually made it on Iron Maiden's 1980s self-titled debut album, and which, as we all know, at least officially, has been written by Steve Harris himself, just like most of Iron Maiden's early songs. And now, whether it is for good or not, we will never know the actual truth. Although back in 2023, Paul Day said in one of the interviews that that dispute has been settled privately and that he has absolutely no claims to that song anymore. But still, it is kind of interesting to see and to think about how the early band members of Iron Maiden actually influenced Steve Harris's songwriting. And I think that pretty much all Iron Maiden fans do know and understand that no matter the claims and no matter anything, Steve Harris was the main songwriter for Iron Maiden, and especially in the early days. And whatever the earliest songs of that band were, I mean, they were shaped and finalized by nobody else but Steve himself. Although I guess we may only wonder how those would have shaped like if Iron Maiden had anybody else on vocals, bass, drums, or guitars at a given period of time. But nevertheless, after leaving Iron Maiden in 1976, Paul went on to perform in several new wave of British heavy metal bands, which is a topic for an absolutely different video. But for now, all I wanted to say is whether you were a fan of Paul Day, whether you even knew of his existence or of his musical legacy together with Iron Maiden or after the band, still, today, after his passing, all of us Iron Maiden fans can only say thank you, Paul, for providing the very first voice to one of the greatest heavy metal bands to ever walk the earth, and shaping the songs which shaped so many of our lives in the earliest of their forms.
We've had a lot of people help us to get to this point. Let's not forget all the people who were in the band, the singers before me, Paul Day, rest in peace, died recently.
But anyways, please let me know if you'd like me to release a special episode on Paul's journey after Iron Maiden, as well as which is your personal favorite song from the early days of Iron Maiden, most likely sung by Paul Day. I'm actually really curious to find out. But for now, thank you so much for watching, guys. I'm sorry about the entourage. I'm actually sitting backstage at a Fine and Mr. festival, and there will be a special episode about this festival as well, of course. But anyways, thank you so much for watching, guys, and we will prevail. Slava Uk.